can do is fine, but it's going to actually take money put in the classroom to help it work. For example, I say in my second article of some things that can be done but are not being done. If the post office can be open on Saturdays, at least for a few hours, why can't schools? These kids, when I talked about poverty, 20% poverty in these schools, these kids, how can you teach a kid to learn when the kid doesn't come to school on a full belly? When the kid comes hungry and the parents are not around for one reason or another, and there's no books in the home, it's got to happen somewhere else. And that place, by default, are the schools. Why can't the schools feed these kids breakfast, lunch, and dinner, provide medical and dental services to them, provide after-school activities, which could include extra tutoring, it could include sports, things to keep them off the street, because everybody knows, it's not a secret, that most of juvenile crime happens between 2 and 6 p.m. So if the kids were in school, and again, it's going to cost money to keep them there, and getting services, remember art and music, then you could do a lot. The kids would learn. And libraries are key. These kids have no local libraries. They've all been shut down. You might find a central library somewhere, but these kids can't get there. How about having them in the schools, again, with librarians? They've closed down libraries in schools because they can't afford to hire and maintain a librarian to serve the children. And I'm talking about poor school districts, and I'm not talking about wealthy school districts. We proved that in one of the wealthier school districts, the former superintendent said he had just about enough money to provide minimum services, and they were providing 120% of foundation budget. Other school districts were able to provide 150, 165% of foundation budget to provide services for their children. So a lot of these school districts that finally got up to 100, they still didn't have enough money. And moreover, it was a moving target because the curriculum frameworks, they kept adding more and more and more frameworks. They started off with English, language, arts, and math, and they said, now you got to pass these tests to graduate. Well, now they're adding science and history and other subjects to the curriculum frameworks that if these kids don't pass, they don't get a diploma. Well, these school districts that I'm talking about don't have the money, don't have the resources to provide what the state is saying you're required to provide. And it's going to take money. There's no other way around it. It takes a lot of other things other than money. It takes a caring. I mean, just very briefly, if anybody here has not seen the movie Stand and Deliver, I recommend that you see it. It's about a very poor school district in East LA where it's talking about a teacher who cared about the kids. There's many other examples of such teachers of all races who care about the kids and go out of their way to make sure the kids are learning. But when we're talking about doing it on a system-wide basis, it takes resources in addition to the caring.
So Art, you've been involved in the litigation in South Carolina. I'm sure you've also thought about these issues from a policy perspective. And earlier you were talking about accountability and results. So how can we get accountability and results either out of these types of cases or maybe not directly through maybe through an approach that combines litigation and policy approach?
So let me spend 3 minutes talking to you about the one case, and I didn't try it. I'm not in the process of trying it. Will not try it, but I can give you secondhand the thumbnail sketch of the South Carolina litigation that has some similarities to the case Alan talked about as a foundation for answering your question directly, actually, I think, with 3 points. There's a case in South Carolina, Abbeville County School District versus the state of South Carolina that was begun with a complaint filed in November of 1993 that my firm led. And it was fundamentally a challenge to the adequacy of funding. It was not an equal funding case, and there was an equal protection claim that was subsequently dismissed. It was actually a case that the South Carolina Supreme Court had taken in its original jurisdiction, and after 6 months thought the better of that and sent it back down to the lower court. The long story short is, and this is a case, I should say, that our firm is doing completely pro bono. That a case that was where the trial began in the year of Brown's 40th anniversary, representing a school district that was the source of the Brown litigation 4 years previous. Tried a case for 103 days, got a final order after a back and forth to the Supreme Court on some fundamental legal issues that shaped the case, where, interestingly, the court found no fundamental merit on the question of adequacy of funding under the state constitution, except for birth through third grade. And the court actually thought that the case was so compellingly made that the challenges and issues were prevalent and right, and the state had not done what it should do, that relief, to be determined, was appropriate in that case. That case was appealed and then argued before the South Carolina Supreme Court in June of '08. We still do not have a decision. You know, the kids who were going into ninth grade have now graduated. And we still do not have a decision in that case about issues that I could give you the statistics and the power, and this is, by the way, on behalf of 36 of the approximately 80 school districts in South Carolina, on which there have been articles written called the Corridor of Shame. They're largely the school districts, if you know geography, that track I-95 going, if you're traveling to Florida or to Myrtle Beach, you're doing the I-95 thing. Very rural, where I actually grew up in a town of 2,000 in South Carolina. And so those school districts put on the stand, this will have resonance for you, superintendents who are willing to testify that 80% of their teachers back in their schools were not qualified. That's, you know, that's chutzpah. That's power when you've got a superintendent willing to take the stand and say, I don't have what I need, and then to be willing to go back and face whatever backlash they will face in the community. And so, lowest paid teachers, highest turnover teachers, fewest advanced degrees, I mean, I could go on and on and on. The issues are so bad, and this will tell you just how old the case is. As I was getting the download from Steve Morrison, who was the lead litigator in the case, he said, we sent box cameras to those schools so the kids could take pictures to then post and show what the issues, what education in some of those schools really looked like. We wouldn't be using box cameras today, presumably. Time flies. But the bottom line is some gross inequity, and a Supreme Court that in at least one phase said, yeah, there is some teeth to the constitutional provision. It's many issues to be resolved. So with that case still pending, and to answer your question, I guess I would offer a couple of things. And I think you see this in the litigation and you see the evolution, but it dovetails with the policy conversations going on. It's not enough to talk about, I need more money. You've got to frame the question on resources. I need more money to spend here in a way that is demonstrably likely to yield to certain results. Actually, playing off of the Lau framework, which some judge actually made up, is a very common sense framework to say, show me that there's a logic, a thought, and a strategy for actually changing the pattern of school and student performance with this investment. And so I think that's point one. I think point two, and this may be a lesson out of this case, and it dovetails with the national conversation right now in terms of where, relatively speaking, do we invest in education, this whole focus on early learning. And that being such a foundation that if we could get that right at the outset, the problems we avoid down the road is huge. And I think this case has some probably marginal implications for the broader policy conversation, but it's there. And the other thing I come back to, frankly, stepping back from all of the details, is are we being as strategic in terms of finding allies to help us make our case as we should be? And I think this goes directly to your question. I'm going to digress from the K through 12 setting for just a second. in Grutter versus Bollinger, post-secondary case involving diversity issues and race and admissions at the University of Michigan, my theory of why the university prevailed in that case on the educational benefits of diversity justifying race-conscious practices was not because they had lots of PhDs and lots of social science research, although they did. What they had was, in combination with that, a business community with Fortune 500 companies, frankly, and retired military officials, to come together to say it is an imperative that we value and ensure diversity in our academic ranks so that we can make the economic case. If we've got employers in our states whining because they can't find the students who are qualified to do the job and therefore jobs are going elsewhere, why aren't we making them more clearly and closely allies to put the pressure, as Marie noted, on the legislature to do the right thing? I think if you create a different, perhaps untraditional or non-traditional mix of allies on this with some force, and it's not to say this hasn't been done in some places, but I think it is an important, as we think strategy and we think not wanting to wait 23 years for a result in a given case, there may be points of leverage that have gone too long underutilized. I won't say underutilized, but underutilized. And so that would be my sort of response to that.
And Marie, I'm interested to hear about your experience. Normally, a lot of times in these cases on the defendant side, but in this context, on the plaintiff side.
My notes about this were difficult, costly, take a long time, don't typically get what you want when you need it. And so that's my frustration with these school funding cases. We've been asked on behalf of school districts to help them do the analysis to see if they wanted to bring these cases, and then of course the next step is finding the appropriate plaintiffs, because you've got to have the plaintiff school children where you can actually show harm. And our advice to, and in some of the analysis we have said to them, you know, in this state we don't think the data and the evidence that we have is really here. In other cases we've said, you do, but we typically recommend thinking about two tracks, and you alluded to it. One is thinking about a litigation track and getting enough together so that the second track, which is going to the legislature and trying to get them to see that they need to do the right thing, that, you know, when they're acting silly, then you say, well, what about this stuff? I mean, we're going to be able to bring this in court. Can't you see, and can you get a coalition? And I have an example, and I wish the person who led it in the state of Maryland was still alive. A friend of mine who was on our county council in Montgomery County, and I know all of you think where I live is rich and we have all this money and we don't have any needs. Not true, but we do have a fairly high wealth county. And Maryland was on our county council and was head of the, whatever the county organization is called, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but she decided with some of her compatriots around the state that they needed to take on school funding issues. Now you think in Montgomery County, what's in it for us, right? Because we pay way more in than we get back, and then we tax ourselves again. But there were enough folks even in Montgomery County that said that we ought to do this. And so she garnered some support throughout the state, and they hired some experts to come in and do it, this group. And then they used that to get some coalition of legislators. Now we're blue, so we're a lot better off than a lot of you guys, but to get some legislators to actually change some of the funding formula. In Montgomery County, we actually got some money for some things because we had most of the English language learners. We had some demographics. We had a very high special ed population, in part because we were kind of a magnet because of some of our programs. So we were able to get some money, not, you know, you never get all the money you need, but they made it enough of a compromise so that the state legislators were willing to do it. And I think that's the best way. This just costs too much and take too long, and God bless everyone who won these cases, but they just don't get from people like me who are sitting there with the school district saying we need the money and we need the money now.